O'Connor, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Tunisia. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for receiving us today.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. As soon as after January 14, the Foreign Minister, the British Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course, visited Tunisia as a sign of support for the new situation.
Yes.
So how do you assess the bilateral relationship between Tunisia and the UK after more than 55 years of the establishment of the diplomatic relations?
Yes. It's a really important question, and when our Foreign Minister William Hague came just after the revolution, what he said at the time was that we've always had a cordial, positive relationship between the UK and Tunisia, but in the past it's been based uniquely on shared interests. And he said, now we have the opportunity to build a new relationship going to a new level based on both shared interests and shared values. So this was his message at the time, and the idea was to project that we saw this as a real opportunity to change the way that the UK and Tunisia interacted, because we felt a much closer partnership with the kind of Tunisia that the people of the revolution were aspiring to, and to be honest, therefore the kind of Tunisia that we are seeing being built today.
Okay, concretely, the new strategy of the UK towards Tunisia after January 14th, what does this consist of?
Well, it consists of a number of different fields.
Starting by the political.
Yes, if we start with the political one, our response to the challenges but also the opportunities of the Arab Spring across the Arab world was to create a new set of programming within the British government to help those countries that were going through changes make those changes as successfully as possible. So in the case of Tunisia, where previously we hadn't had any substantial presence in terms of cooperation funding, because our cooperation is traditionally orientated towards alleviation of poverty in the poorest countries. Tunisia is not one of the poorest countries, and therefore has never been an economic development priority. But when we saw this opportunity with the Arab Spring and the revolution in Tunisia, it became clear to us that it was essential for us to be present and able to support in terms of all of the political and economic reform challenges that were coming up. So what we've done is we've started programs. For example, in the early days, it was in things like the electoral reform process for the temporary electoral law. There was a lot of work in helping educate voters, because it was extremely difficult to voters to understand the choice that was put in front of them with more than 100 parties. But it was also very important that voters did understand that choice and did choose. So there was voter education. There was also support for the media and the media laws that were developed during that time of the early transition, in order to identify a proper way to regulate a free media. Media should be free, but there should also be a proper legal framework. For example, should one person be able to own all of the media? Should you be able to attack people personally in a way which is invading of their privacy? And these are things which need to be judged, the balance between privacy and freedom of speech, of course, but they're things which need to be set out in a legal framework, and we helped the Media Commission do that. We've also done projects relating to civil society development, relating more recently to the development of enabling political parties to learn how to play their role, whether in opposition or whether in coalition. In the UK we have a coalition, we also have opposition parties, so sharing those kinds of experiences. And so we've helped to build capacity with some of these organisations that are facing very, very new challenges. I should just say though, as we do this, we have to be very conscious that we must avoid in some way imposing some kind of external agenda or unhelpfully skewing or influencing the direction which the Tunisian people who created their revolution and are taking forward the revolution want to go in. And so for us, the challenge is we neither want to be interfering, nor do we want to be passive. So we want to be available and responsive to requests and the needs of people who are facing these very difficult challenges, without somehow coming in to say we know the answer. To be honest, the UK has never had a revolution, so we really don't. We're not the people to set out experience of how to handle this sort of situation. But we can give case studies in how things work in our countries and help build capacity.
Okay, I would like just rapidly to focus on the economic collaboration,
yes.
economic level. How, according to you, what are the tools able to deepen the collaboration between the UK and Tunisia and
yes.
make the relations more sufficient and satisfactory?
Yes, okay. Well, I would say that maybe there are 4 things that we can do. The first thing is at the trade level. We can help our companies see the opportunities that they might not otherwise be able to see here. We of course can't tell our companies where they should invest or who they should trade with, but if we think we see opportunities here that our companies are not aware of, then it is our job both to help them, but also to help support Tunisia, to show them, to bridge that knowledge gap. So that's one thing which we're doing very actively to try to make sure companies know what the new opportunities are. In an environment where corruption is being tackled, in an environment where there will be better transparency, in an environment where there might be new economic opportunities. So that's one, but that's the first part. The second part is within our cooperation approach, our programming approach, where we want to, unfortunately I wish we had an infinite budget for these things. We can't, we have to prioritise. But one of the areas that we have prioritised is, for example, microcredits, where you can support people who are creating their own jobs through relatively small amounts of loan money, which enables them to build businesses, to then also learn, then pass on that learning as their businesses grow. It's a very important thing to be done. But also one of the areas that I want to get involved in more and increase our support for is the process of economic reform. So there are all sorts of aspects of setting up business in Tunisia or trading with Tunisia where on the world ratings Tunisia does relatively well. But it could do even better, and if it did do even better, then it would attract more investment. So I would say that would be the second, the cooperation part would be the second. And the third part is, of course, within the European Union. The UK, as a member of the European Union, has a view on what the European Union should do, how it should respond. Our view is that the step change should be dramatic, very, very significant, given the significant change in Tunisia. We shouldn't just be making a sort of gradual, incremental upgrade. We should really make a big step. That should be both at the sort of symbolic political level, some kind of advanced status or privileged partnership or something of this sort. This should be agreed quickly. It should be agreed in a meaningful way. But we should also try and find ways that the European Union can help Tunisia in terms of practical economics. For example, progressively opening up the markets. We believe that it's important that the trading relationship should be expanded, because the engine of the Tunisian economy is not other people's cooperation programming. It's actually about Tunisian industry, Tunisian agriculture, Tunisian services being able to drive the economy largely through exports. So we want to make sure that the key markets are as open as they can be. And this is one thing that we want to push forward. And the European Union as a whole all does want to do that. And we're working to something called a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, which means really progressive integration genuine in the European economy. And then the fourth thing I would say is at a much, much larger scale, involvement in all of the key international financial institutions. So the UK is a member of the board of all of these key institutions, so the African Development Bank and the World Bank and the European Investment Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and the International Monetary Fund. All of these organisations, the UK is a very significant shareholder in and able to influence the decisions of how these organisations respond to Tunisia's needs. And what they have done, I think pretty successfully, but we have to make sure the momentum is maintained, is they have opened up opportunities for borrowing money at very low rates for long-term infrastructure projects. It doesn't fix the problem right now, but it does set the way for ensuring that Tunisia, as it develops over the next 5 or 10 years, is really able to establish a strong economic infrastructure.
Great. I've just discovered that you have a blog.
Good.
Yeah. So, is it a new way, diplomatic one but informal one at the same time, to get closer to people and to engage with them?
I think it's what you've described it as is perfectly accurate.
Okay.
This is the idea. It isn't supposed to replace our sort of formal diplomatic work, but it is supposed to make sure that what we do is transparent to people. Very often people wonder what embassies do and what ambassadors do. And I think we owe it to our own public and we owe it to the Tunisian public to give at least some feel of what we do and what we think and how we operate and why we're here. So this is part of sort of transparency approach. I think people do, and people are welcome. If they appreciate it, they're welcome to keep looking at it. If they don't appreciate it, they're welcome not to keep looking at it. So it's just a question of trying to give a sense of what we're doing. If there's something we really think is important, we tell the media. We can also put it on our blog.
So I see it's a part of the whole strategy of communication of the United Kingdom embassy here. What about the whole strategy? How to get closer to the civil society, for instance, public and private actors?
Mm-hmm.
How do you work?
Mm-hmm. Well, our job in an embassy is firstly to understand as well as we can the environment that we're in, and then secondly to identify the opportunities to benefit in a win-win way, benefit our own public and benefit the Tunisian public and Tunisia as a whole, and build partnerships. Now this can happen, of course, people tend to think of it happening at governmental levels, ministers meeting and shaking hands and signing documents, which is important because those documents can then change frameworks of how things work. But it's also important that there should be both formal and informal cooperation at all sorts of other levels. So civil society, for example, yes, we're working to try to help civil society here connect with civil society in the UK, where there can be exchanges of experience, where they can build partnerships, where we can sometimes directly support civil society. Also in Parliament, the new Constituent Assembly, all of the members are new to their work. And they're interested in finding out how other people around the world do that kind of work. So we've had a number of visits from British parliamentarians to build contacts with the Constituent Assembly members. And it can be the same at all sorts of other levels. We've encouraged connections. We don't need to do a lot to encourage it because it happens naturally, but we're extremely positive about connections between the unions and our unions, for example. About connections with practitioners in very particular fields, in crisis management. You know, there are many areas in which we face common challenges, and we might as well understand what thinking other people have done on these challenges. So yes, we're keen to make sure it's across the board. We're keen to make sure that it's both formal and organised, but also where people can build natural partnerships where they're picking up the telephone and asking for each other's advice. This is even better.
Okay, so within the framework of that communication, how do you comprehend English language as a tool able to build bridges between British people and Tunisians?
Very, very important, I think, for Tunisia. Tunisia has been through a huge political revolution, of course. I think it's going through also, in a slightly less visible way, it's going through a kind of linguistic revolution. I think it's turning from a country which is traditionally bilingual to a country which is going to be trilingual, where people are going to be speaking English, French and Arabic. In business and in culture and in the films they watch and all of these things. And that'll have a number of effects. One is it'll help open up new opportunities. For example, on the internet, the amount of information available in English, if it is not available to somebody because they're not an English speaker, that by changing that you really open up people's ability to access information. That's a freedom of information question. But it's also an economic opportunity if you want to access all sorts of markets around the world, if people want to have global work opportunities. Travelling, but also not travelling, virtual global work opportunities also. Then this, by being trilingual as opposed to bilingual, this is a huge step forward. So we're primarily, our activity in helping this is through the British Council. the British Council teaches English, but it also supports others who are teaching English, in particular the Tunisian Education Ministry. There are 3 ministries that cover education broadly in Tunisia. It's the Education Ministry, the Higher Education Ministry, and the Ministry of Labour and Vocational Training. And the British Council is engaged with all 3 of these ministries to try to find ways of supporting English teaching within the context of schools, universities and vocational training centres.
Okay, so during your diplomatic career, you have been in Lebanon, in Saudi Arabia,
yes,
yeah, in Canada, in Egypt.
Yes.
So I guess that each country has its unique characteristics.
Yes.
So what are the things that you enjoyed the most in Tunisia since 2008?
Well, you could say that I've been in 2 more countries, Tunisia before the revolution and Tunisia after the revolution,
okay.
because they are at least as different as Tunisia and any of these other countries.
Yeah, from traditions to nature,
yes,
to handicrafts, to culture.
Yes. Well, of course, an enormous amount has changed, and for me, the excitement, the unique excitement that I will remember for all of my life, is around this dramatic opening up of freedoms and of political space for people to have opinions, for people to air these opinions, for people to do something about their opinions and try to make changes that they want. And this is an enormous opportunity, but it's an enormous privilege for me to observe close up this incredible change, which is both dramatic and positive. There are too many cases in the world where dramatic changes are crises and disasters. This is a case where a dramatic change is a really positive opportunity. So that has been the overwhelmingly exciting thing to do. At the same time, when you live in Tunisia, you have an opportunity to see the desert. Probably, I would say, of all of the things, the beaches and the desert and the mountains and forests in the north. Of all of these, I would say the desert. I would say the really the most special experience when not at work and going on a trip with the family is to go camping in the desert, to go to Douz, for example, and then to head from Douz out over the sand dunes that just go on forever, and to be able to set up a tent and a campfire and camp there under the stars. It's the most beautiful experience, and of course it's an experience which is entirely different from where I was brought up in London, where one cannot imagine being able to have that kind of opportunity just for a weekend.